What is going on, Hot Take Nation? It is DRW here for another episode of Hot Take of the Day podcast. And today I'm very fortunate to be joined by a longtime friend of mine, Laura Preng. Laura, first, before I introduce you, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So you're working from home. I'm working from home. Most of the planet is working from home. How is the working from home going? I like the little background art you got going there.
Oh, thanks. It's going fine. It's been an easier transition than I had ever thought. I always thought I was, better off going into the office, less distractions. But really, I think I put in more time working from home than I ever did at the office, for sure. The biggest problem here is my two dogs, and I'll apologize in advance. They're out on a walk right now, but when they're here and that they see a FedEx truck or an Amazon delivery truck come down our cul-de-sac, they just lose their minds. And there's no convincing them that they're not coming to attack us. So, and that they seem to bark at, some inopportune times, but that's the worst of it. I think I'm doing a lot better than a lot of other folks, that's for sure.
Well, in fairness, I think I'm probably now like a dog. Like if I see humanity just walking by the house at any point, I'm like against the windows and I'm like, oh, can I come for a walk? I want to come for a walk. I want to go. So, Amazon guy comes up. I'm like, hey, you want to come in? Just hang out. Like, we'll social distance, whatever you want, man. I want to learn about you. I want to know what's going on in your life.
I'm sure this has been very difficult for you.
Yeah, as a social person, this has been it's been very difficult. But anyway, now I've known you for, I was going to say it's probably been like 8 years. And,
that would have been my guess.
And perhaps longer. And so you are in the business of talent recruitment in the energy industry in particular with Preng & Associates. Do you want to just talk quickly about Preng & Associates and then your role and what you're doing, and then we'll talk about how it flows into our conversation today.
Sure. So a little background. The firm's been around for 40 years. My father started it back in October of 1980. So they've, especially my more senior partners, have seen a lot of the ups and downs of the industry. All we do is energy. And so, this is something, while it's many of us have never seen before. We can look back at 14, 15, 16, thinking that was the worst we've ever seen for our age group. But certainly this is much more dramatic. But we do executive retained search, and I'm one of the partners. Most of my clients are upstream, midstream, some downstream. I work a lot with private equity and technology groups, and so. What we're seeing right now is, we still have a number of active searches going on, I think almost 30. We've got a number that are on hold. As you can imagine, a lot of our clients who have been going through the interview process using video are waiting to, do the final interviews or go to that offer stage until they can do it in person, which is understandable. I can get that.
How much do you think, and I think that's a really great conversation about, we started with working from home and then we talked about video conference, and a lot of people are saying, well, maybe this is the new normal. Maybe half people go in, half people go out. And yet at the same time, in terms of making an offer, just having that physical presence, how do you think that will interplay over this industry and all industries over the next couple of years based on what you've seen in your career?
I think it'll adjust. I think you're absolutely right. I think we'll see some more people or companies thinking, why am I paying all this rent for this office space? And we did perfectly fine working from home. I think having that touch point, though, when you're bringing somebody into the fold, you want to make sure they're can be a part of your culture and understand, what the company is made of. It could be a little difficult for some to do over video, but we've certainly had some clients put out offers while we all have been at home. And so I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis with what they're comfortable doing. So we'll see. It's hard to tell right now, but I think we will see more people working from home, and I do think we'll see layered shifts so to speak, of going into the office.
Yeah, I mean, you make it's very funny to me because I think back on my career, and I know we've stayed in touch over all of it. And in 2016, when we started One Energy Partners, we actually had a partner in New York, a partner in Houston, a partner in Denver, and we hired our land partner in Dallas, never having met, all doing video. And we had something very similar to Zoom. I think the first one went out of business, which is, I like talk about timing is everything. And it was called Squiggle. And we called it the Squig. And so every morning you would log into your computer and you would just have the camera in the background on. And if you wanted to go talk to someone like in a private room, you could pull them off. But this is how we worked for three years. And it was amazing how many people found it so bizarre. And then we would invite
I was
people,
one of those people.
I know you were. And we would invite people to have like conference calls via video. And it was very different in that, yet now it's just accepted. Like, we have the longest renovation project going in the history of time. And some people are fixing some wood outside. So I'm shoved in my son's bedroom, and I had to move my whole computer setup. And so here I am. And it is going to be really interesting to see as it evolves. Now, you talked about your talent and you have 30 searches going, and that you also are a retained search as opposed to commission. Can you talk, for those who aren't familiar with maybe the talent recruiting business, what the difference is and what the pros and cons maybe in this time frame would be for one model versus the other?
I'll keep it real simple. So retained versus contingent search. Typically on a retained search, the firm, we would be the only ones working on that assignment. So, and they tend to be higher level. So we focus everything from boards through the C-suite, down through the executive and senior leadership teams. We have a much deeper process in how we find our candidates. I have a research team in-house that goes into different organizations and breaks them down as far as the org chart, so we can find candidates depending on what the search is who are relevant for that search. Contingency firms are paid only when their candidate is hired. So while we get paid, I would say regardless, we do milestones for each invoice. So we get part up front, part when we present candidates, and then the last third or last tranche typically is on offer and acceptance. Okay. Whereas a contingent firms, and there may be 4, 5, 6 different contingency firms working on one role. And so it is a speed game for sure for them, because they want to get their person in first and hopefully get that person hired, because that's the only way they're going to get paid.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's a very simple way of describing it.
And in this time, so I mean, I'm sure a lot of people tuning in, and we've seen the job losses every week and in every facet, upstream, downstream, midstream. And so I'm sure there's a lot of energy professionals saying, okay, so how do I go and get a job? Are you going to find me? Do I find you? Should I work with you? Should I submit my resume? Like, what do you find are effective ways in this day and age for someone to be found?
LinkedIn, for sure. Every recruiting agency, executive search firm, research teams within them are going to be looking on LinkedIn. When I talk to people who are considering new opportunities or looking for new opportunities, depending on where they are in their career, if you are at the individual contributor level, then my firm likely is not going to be able to help you, because those are not the mandates that we have. These search engagements we have are for people who have, well experienced. So, but for somebody who is at the either management or executive level in their career, I tell them to make sure that they are on the radar of not only Preng and Associates, but all of our competitors. And the easiest way that they can do that is just to go to the websites of each of the executive search firms and upload their resume into their database, because the first place every firm looks when they start a new search is, who do we know? Who's in our database? And so it's not that your resume would go in and get lost and, with the thousands of others. We all have a system that codes. And so if I want to go in, I'm looking for a chief financial officer for a client. I have different metrics or attributes that I can punch into our system, our database, and the relevant folks will pop up.
So let's break that into two. What do you look for in a resume of a candidate you haven't necessarily seen before? And, maybe they are an individual contributor, but they think they're ready for the next level. So no doubt they're applying for all the CEO jobs or CFO jobs. How do you recommend people, highlight themselves in a resume that would, be queryable in your system? What advice would you give people?
So make it, first of all, easy to read. I've seen a lot of really interesting resumes. I don't know who's put out there with a bunch of graphs and charts, and to me, it just looks like they're trying to hide something. So I think first and foremost, make it easy to read. What have you done? Who have you worked for? What have you done? And what have you accomplished? So you want somebody to be able to pick up your resume and look at it, and if they have a need, that's why they're looking at your resume. You want them to be able to say, well, David was able to do this for company XYZ. He can come in and surely do that for me. So numbers are important, percentages. You want to, put some meat into your accomplishments. Don't bullet everything. Paragraph, what were your responsibilities? What was the scope of the role? What was the size of the team that you led? And then bullet, 3, 4, 5 accomplishments, and, put the metrics in there. And what did you do? What did you actually accomplish? And how did you add value? And that's what you want the reader to take away from reading your resume.
How much do you think the actual act of the resume, in terms of the speed that prospective employer, I assume that there are a lot of people being screened by employers at this point for roles because there's a lot of people looking for work. How long do you think they spend on the resume? And is it worth hiring a professional service, as an example, to tune up a resume? Or is it just, if you stay within the confines of easy to read, one-ish page, very simple, highlight all the things you talked about, is there a skill there, do you think?
Well, going back to how long people look at the resume, if it's more than 30 seconds, unless they're really interested, I would be surprised. People have different opinions on the professional resume writers that are out there. I always offer to give my 2 cents, and people can take it for what it's worth. And I'll throw that out there right now too. People want to get in touch with me, I'm happy to take a look at the resume. I'm sure there are some very good resume writers out there. I don't use them, so I can't necessarily recommend anyone. But there's certainly people out there doing that, and others taking advantage of their services.
But the takeaway is, make sure that your resume is uploaded, not just with one, but with everybody. And spend time on LinkedIn, and expect that sort of someone will be looking at you for 30 seconds. So make sure in 30 seconds the message is delivered.
Think about, LinkedIn is your initial resume. So it needs to, it doesn't have to have all the gritty details that your, resume that you're sending out would look like. But, make sure it's detailed enough, because people are going to be looking at it and making an opinion about, whether they want to continue and pursue you. So it's something, certainly, I think some of us, my LinkedIn could use a lot of improvement, but do as I say, not as I've done.
Well, you have been with Preng for a while, and I feel like there may be an association there that may be helpful in
right.
context. So let's talk about LinkedIn for a second, because I think that, historically, energy professionals in particular have been afraid of social media. And I think that there's maybe there's 2 schools of thought. There's one that's like, put it all out there. We may know someone on this call that is like that. We might. And then there's others. Then there's others who may not, have as much content out there. What's your recommendation generally for people on their use of LinkedIn? Should they comment? Should they like? Should they create content? How should they manage their brand in LinkedIn, in your opinion?
I am one that will like. I don't necessarily put out content like you do, but it's I just for what people are comfortable with. I think it would vary, but you want to make sure that you're visible, especially if you're looking for a job. You want to make sure that your profile is pops up when a researcher goes in and puts in key attributes in their LinkedIn recruiter account. And so you want to make sure that you're connected to as many people as you can be, because that opens up your network. And when it comes to liking or commenting, you certainly don't want to do anything that a future employer is going to be able to come across, and it's going to come across negatively. So you be careful about that.
So your general advice is don't spend 18 months railing on an industry about how wrong they were, then show that you were right, and then expect that there's not going to be blowback from that. Is that a fair summary of what you said?
Take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, no, I do for sure. So let's talk about the state of the industry. How have you seen it change? You sort of alluded to the fact you've never seen anything quite like this. I agree. I think it's very different. What do you make of future employment and future skills that you'd be looking for that might be different than before? And if people just finally get fed up and realize that maybe there aren't the roles that they hoped for in energy and they need to pivot, how would you recommend people go about that? So I guess it's a two-part question in terms of what's coming for energy people and how do you pivot?
Well, no crystal ball here, but I don't think it's far-fetched to say that it's going to be a much smaller industry. Concerning company-wise, I think very much going to be more, and it's always been technology-driven, but I think we're going to see even more come into play on that front. But I think it's going to be a shrinking. It's not going away. Let's put it that way. I mean, oil and gas, energy. The industry is needed. We put out a very valuable commodity. It's going to be here in the future. But I think we're not going to see like we did, the 100 different private equity portfolio companies, and I think that's going to look very different. There's going to be, I think, a lot of consolidation. We're already seeing the bankruptcies, and so. I think the roles are going to be fewer and far between. It's not, you can't just go grab, your buddies, 3 or 4 buddies who y'all have all been, doing a great job, been successful, and, go get $100 million and, go get some land. I think that model we've seen hasn't worked in the past year or so. And, for that reason, I think it's going to be a much, smaller. The opportunities are going to, I think, be reduced, and so as far as talent, it's really going to be a challenge, for folks to find the right talent. 'Cause you got to find the right talent that can navigate these kinds of waters.
Do you think that employers have changed what they're looking for in candidates then, based on what you said? I mean, there's probably more applicants for less jobs, and therefore there's probably more diversity of skills and talents and backgrounds, and some are creative, some are super tech. Like, have you seen dramatically in your searches a lot of change from what they're looking for? No,
not necessarily, but I think it's still too soon. I think it's early, but I do think it will come. We're going to be seeing. It's not necessarily just going to be the technical skills. It's going to be how do they manage a crisis, and what happened. How did they navigate what they were doing during this period, and what happened to what were the results? What was the outcome on the other side? So I think it's still a little too early. I know some of my clients right now, there is that sense that there should be plenty of A players out there, and there are. Unfortunately, there's some great talent on the street, so to speak. But my clients always demand A players. That's why they come to us.
Now, when I think about people who want to change industries and they say, okay, I've been in energy, and certainly my experience in energy is, I've been in the industry for 20 years, and notwithstanding it was in 2 countries, I've generally known, I think I said in my book, if you have to pick up the phone more than once to raise money, you shouldn't be raising money. And if people want to find you, they know where you are. And so that's sort of been the industry, where it's very tight knit. It's very reputational based. Everyone knows everyone. And I would call you and you would tell me what's going on, or you'd call me and ask for, but that's the way. But as I think about how would I pivot into a technology role or a manufacturing role or a totally different industry, I wouldn't even have the first concept on how to do that. What advice would you give, if any, about that?
It's interesting. There's a lot of talk about that too right now. And I think in fact, I saw on LinkedIn that there's a group called Petroleum Pivoters. And
I saw that as well. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. So, I think I would take a look at, if you're considering leaving the industry, just because you're sick and tired of going through these cycles. I would look at what industries are either doing well right now or should recover quickly. And take a look at what skills do you have that are transferable. And it's going to take research. It's going to take looking at, if you're in human resources, those skills you can transfer easily to different industries. If you're in finance, the same can be said. I think, maybe for petroleum engineers, it might be a little bit more difficult, but, this industry is very data driven. And so for that reason, there's a number of industries that, that are looking for that mindset. And so it's taking a look at different industries where your skill set, you can leverage that. And, I would go on, again, going back to LinkedIn, start looking at other people's profiles that are in those industries and see how they came up the ranks and try to start networking with them. And I heard somebody also say, and I don't know this for a fact, but that let's say you've done your research on the industries and you found some companies within those industries that are interesting to you, to follow them on LinkedIn, because their internal recruiters will look at the people following them when they go and look at prospects for any openings that they have, which makes sense because, but I think it's really in having different versions of your resume, that tailor to different industries and different openings within those industries is important.
What about the cover letter?
So I think it depends on what level, the role is that you're applying for. And if you're emailing your resume to someone, you don't necessarily need to put a cover letter on it. You can type in, in the email. But if you have, let's say, the one thing I think that a cover letter can do, if it's not put in an email, is you can really tell your story and highlight different aspects and things that you've done, especially if your background is varied and maybe doesn't look cohesive. If you're reading it, like can't explain why you would take one step to this other step, and that may be an opportunity for you to really spell it out and explain the skills that you have and the value that you bring.
It's funny, and I didn't think of this story until you sparked my memory, but I remember when I was in university and I was applying for roles, and at the time it was the late 90s, and it was all about the cover letter. There was no LinkedIn, there was none of the reputational stuff, and you would go to the on-campus recruiter and you try and differentiate yourself. And I remember one of the evenings BP had like an evening learn-in. And I asked a lot of questions, and I acted a lot like I do today. And not surprisingly, I didn't get the interview. And another company, I wrote a explanation as to why I felt that they were the #1 takeover candidate in industry. and that I would help them realize their value. Now, coming out of university, that was a big statement, except that the morning I had the interview, they actually had an offer to be purchased, and they ended up closing the search because they got bought by a company. And the whole interview was me explaining whether they should tender their shares, which was also very funny. But going back to LinkedIn a little bit, do you think that people should pay for the service? I've heard the expression in the past that if you don't pay for something, you are the product. And so, it's a Microsoft company. It is driving Microsoft mandates, narratives, tools, whatever. I know recruiters use it and have a paid service. What about for people who aren't in that space? Should they have a premium account? Does that give you access to things? And do you think it's worth the dollars in your perspective for a potential employee?
I don't think so. I mean, and it's hard necessarily for me to say because I know early on, I think I had the free account. I mean, this is 10 years ago.
Right.
And I don't know what it looks like now, to be honest with you, what access you have, but I wouldn't think so. You are not trying, if you're not trying to do what, let's say, a recruiting firm is trying to do on LinkedIn. You're there to make professional contacts, network professionally with people. You can do that, I assume, on the free one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about tips you would have on interviewing? And maybe we'll start with, let's say the recruiter calls you. I've submitted my resume. I've done nice work on LinkedIn. And I guess one question on that is, would you put seeking employment in your title? I've always said no. It's sort of like, looking for date. People, I would think, tend to go the other direction. But for a recruiter, do you look for seeking employment, looking for new opportunities, or do you want something more creative in the title, like a description of what they do?
So I'm with you on this. I think it looks a little desperate.
Yeah.
And so I have always encouraged people not to put it on there. There is, I know, in the settings, a setting that people can mark if they're open to opportunities, that recruiters are the only ones who see it through their recruiter LinkedIn account when they go looking. It'll show that this person is open to new opportunities. So it also, if they are currently employed, their employer won't see it. It keeps it private. But my school thought is not to put that in your title. And because also when somebody, and this is from the recruiter, the search consultant's point of view, not necessarily the in-house recruiter for a company. But if I was to take a candidate, they're going to go look them up on LinkedIn. And if it says, looking for, new opportunity, then most of our candidates are passive, meaning they are not necessarily looking. I'm calling people up who are, majority of them are currently working and pretty happy with what they're doing, and that are willing to listen to a new opportunity. And that's how we typically start the conversation. So it may be different for somebody who is working for an organization and internally doing the recruiting for them, that they may seek out those individuals. It's not that I wouldn't call somebody who has that. It's just my initial gut feeling when I see it. But I'm not in their shoes, so. Yeah.
That was one of my first. It was actually my first hashtag hot take of the day post was to everyone on LinkedIn. Please change from seeking new opportunities to investor, because neither of you actually work during the day, but investor sounds better. And that was the first post I ever did. So I get the call from the recruiter, and what advice do you have in that conversation? And maybe what would be the same or different versus a conversation with the prospective employer?
So if the recruiter calls you, we always say, give them the time, give them the 5 minutes and hear what they have to say. It amazes me when people are, not so kind or nice or polite. I'm only calling because I have an opportunity. It may not be the right opportunity for you. but it might. It might be the best opportunity for your buddy who was laid off last week, and I don't know him yet, but you're going to make that introduction because you want to help him, sort of thing. I think it could be a pay it forward type situation. And I've had a number of people who I have called in the past, some who never called me back, who have come back to me, and their situation has changed, and they've very apologetic, and I'm sorry, I never called you back 6 months ago, but I did keep your number, and now I'm in a situation where I need help. And so to establish that relationship with a search consultant could help you in so many ways, especially if you moving on in your career and later in your career, if you are interested in getting on boards. We do a significant amount of search for board members, and more companies are leaving let's bring my buddy on the board to going to the search firms to help them bring in a more diverse talent pool.
So what you're saying is I should have called you to get on the board of CDEV instead of buying the shares that I bought.
They still haven't let you on there?
I know, it's so weird, but it is. I mean, and we'll tie back, I think, to that conversation at the end, just in terms of, and I think that your point on networking, LinkedIn is more than just click and then send them a note saying, "Hey, do you have a job?" It's about having a long-term relationship. And I would use you and I as an example. Certainly over the course of my career, I've interviewed at some places early on. They were your results. And I think I've sent some candidates your way. But every time we'd bump into each other, every time you were in town, every time I was in town, we'd hook up, we'd chat, we'd visit on what the trends of the industry were. And so, I would count you as a friend. And I think the more friends you have in the world, you just never know, pay it forward. And it just is so easy to smile and so hard to frown is sort of the thing. And I've been known for taking a lot of LinkedIn coffees where people who have never met me before will shoot me a note saying, "Hey, I'm coming to town. Would you have a coffee?" And I say yes. And they're always surprised. And I told everyone, there's no meeting or no coffee I won't take once, because that you just never know.
Exactly. I agree.
Now, in terms of the macro, as you look forward to the next 5 years, so we talked about a smaller industry, we've talked about potentially talent changing, we've talked about changing in governance, on your board talk. Do you think that will, from the boards, do you think that you'll find a lot more of these people who were senior in their careers and then left the industry be put on boards to help steward them in the go forward, or what kind of conversations are you having on those board fronts? Because I find that very interesting. And I didn't mean it I find that very interesting to be on a board. Clearly I would be on a board, but I meant from the management team works for the board, and the board is the one who's supposed to be stewarding the direction of the company. And yet management teams do get in a lot of slack for, taking the wrong direction, but really it was the board that approved the compensation package, approved the budget, approved the strategy, etc. What's your take on all that?
Well, I think the boards are, a good board is nose in, hands off. And when it comes to leading the company, you need to make sure that they have the right people in place, and not just in place on the executive team, but also on the board. And so board refreshes are important. It's important to take a look at, what skill sets do we have right now on the board? Where do we want to be in 3 or 5 years? What skill sets will we need to get us there? And, do a gap analysis. Where are we missing, those skills? And, do we need to bring additional board members on, do a refresh, et cetera? I think that's just good governance in and of itself, is to, they're there to, for the stakeholders, and, to make sure that things are going right. And so, you need to make sure you have the right skills. And you'll, past few years, we've seen more people come on, that are experts in the technology field, in the cyber world. And so, they may never have been on a board before. They may never have been in an energy company, but they bring that skill set that the boards need. So I think it's just taking a good hard look at, who they are, where they want to go, and how are they going to get there.
How much, when you're thinking about soft skills, we talked about some of the tangible hard skills. What have you done? What have you delivered? And that's the measure up by which candidates are measured to a degree. But then there's the softer skills and maybe some of the more diversity points. And I don't mean just diversity in terms of men, women, or race or religion or whatever. I mean diversity in terms of thinkers versus doers, visionaries versus tacticians, sort of as you build out a team. So if you're working with a company on a mandate, how much time do you look at their executive and sort of like pre-identify a type of person, or does that fit get judged after some other
No.
element?
So that's one of the challenging things right now, not being able to physically be together. But the fit is, I think, one of the most important things when it comes to doing the executive search process. So we spend a lot of time with our clients on the front end. Back before the whole shutdown, I mean, we could spend a couple of days, meeting the executive team, interviewing them one-on-one, watching them interact as a group to really understand and, try to see how, what makes them tick, what's important to them, what is the culture, not just what they say the culture is of the company, but, really what is it? And then, you need to apply that when you're talking to potential candidates, because, the joke, this is just a joke, but you stick an Aggie in a company that's full of, Texas Longhorns, will that work? Well, yes, of course it could work. That's just, the joke of, but taking a look really at the culture, and can an individual, will they be successful in that type of culture? I have, one time was interviewing, and this was early on the phone, because we'll typically, qualify somebody, have them walk us through their resume, see if they even are potential fit before we go spend time meeting with them. And had a potential candidate, and on paper and talking to him on the phone, I mean, spot on, checked every box on the position specification. So it scheduled a face-to-face, and within 15 minutes, I knew this individual would never fit in the company. It just was not a cultural fit. And so, that's one of the difficult things, and I don't think you necessarily get that doing video conference. So with the new client, could be a little difficult. But certainly, with our existing clients, we try to get to know them as well as possible.
If you were, without calling any examples to names, but I mean, you've been around the industry for a long time, and you've seen teams that have good culture, bad culture that say they have good culture, command and control culture, all the different ones. If you were to look at performance through this downturn, just as a general statement, is there a correlation that you can make at all with maybe the different leadership styles that you've come across, and any that you think work actually better than not? Or is that not really an obvious thing to evaluate?
I can't say, for certain that one is better than another's having more success, or, I think it's important, though, if you have a culture where we're all in this together, not to use that phrase again that we've heard, but, we're all, we see where we want the ship to go, and we're all working to make that happen, then those are going to be the most successful, regardless if you are a, control and demand, or work hard, play hard, or whatever the culture may be. If everybody has that common goal and is working for it, I think that's where you're going to see the most success.
Yeah, and I've certainly believed for a very long time of there are some times that someone just doesn't fit into a company. And so I do wonder, in the current energy industry, as we talk about the number of A players that might become available, the number, we had record unemployment in the US. Now, obviously in industry, we'd seen job losses, but I do wonder about the upskilling that could be done in the short term, just because of cultural fit. And I know, myself as an example, I think it's very clear vision and building and energy and giving people power is sort of my thing. And in an organization where that's not the case, that's not going to work. And I remember in the book I write about Chad from Rhode Island, who I think you know who the actual person is. And in Anadarko, he's like, look, David, you're not going any higher. Like, this is in this culture with these people, with these people in front of you, you're going to beat your head against the wall for the next 3 or 4 years, and you should really look at leaving. And so I always credited him with sort of the awakening that I would have stayed at Anadarko my whole career. And the fact that culturally, with where they were post Kerr-McGee, it was no longer a fit for me. And I was very blessed that I was able to move into other roles where my fit was better. So I do wonder about the culture and how companies would be really thinking about soft skills that maybe energy companies aren't really known for historically.
Well, I don't know. I think they are, depending on, obviously the size of the company, but even some of the large players, there's a certain culture, and there's certain people that would not do well, in a Shell or an Exxon because of the way that they're wired. And so, it's soft skills. It doesn't matter what your role is within an organization. They're important, right? And it doesn't matter what industry you're in. They're important.
Is there anything that people could do, engineers that sort of joke about the difference between an introverted and extroverted engineer is you're looking at your shoes versus looking at my shoes. Clearly I'm the extroverted engineer. Yeah, exactly. No one even knows I'm an engineer, but is there some skills that you would recommend people to build, or some courses they could take, or some actions they could take to be better relationship or softer, build it? Like, I know that you can't change the fundamental core of who you are, but maybe you can get better at certain skills. Are there any recommendations you would make there?
It's interesting. Have you heard of the Hogan assessment?
I have not. Is it like Myers-Briggs in construct?
It's a personality. How you basically will predicts how you would respond in certain situations just by your personality, and help give you ideas and things to build on. But as far as if you know what the problem is, I think some people don't know what their deficiencies are. They don't recognize that, and so unless you do or have been told, there's not any particular area that I say, if you, if you're an asshole, you're just an asshole, right? And how do you go and fix that? You're right. And going back to saying you can't change the core of who you are, but if I need to do a better job of communicating or putting myself out there, or if it's a confidence issue, there's plenty of online resources. And even now, as most people are at home, if there are other skills, even technical skills, this is a great time to go and do some online learning. There's free courses out there, and if you need to build on a skill set, especially if you're thinking of moving industries, now's a great time to do that.
Are there any CEOs or C-suite people or board members or real mentors that to you look at as an example of either a way that they ran their career, a way that they held themselves, or that you really respect and think of as sort of a model for people to look up to? Any heroes of yours like that?
Sure. I think, you want me to name names?
If you want to, or you can be generic, but this is your opportunity to really, give a shout out to your secret crush. Everyone knows who my secret crush is.
Well, she was one that I would say I admire, and I admire her as well for her soft skills. So, we did some work for Vicki, and she couldn't have been nicer and responsive, and I have a lot of respect for that. There's a number of my clients who I just think the world of it because of, either they're very attentive and considerate, and easy and fun to work with, but that they really care about their people and, taking care of them and growing them. And so, it's been fun. It's always fun, working with those types of individuals.
Yeah, it does come down to it's the people you work with almost more so than what you're doing. I mean, it's great to love what you do, and I know you love what you do. I love what I do. But when I look back at the happiest times of my career, even when success wasn't happening, it was always the people that I worked with. And I know it sounds kind of trite, but being in the trenches with people, if you like them, we always had as an interview question, like if you got stuck in the elevator with the team for 2 hours, could you leave that elevator without someone dying? And that was like our criteria during the interview process, was like, if you couldn't get stuck in the elevator with the 7 people on our management team and stay in there comfortable, the person who didn't fit probably didn't fit in the culture that we were trying to build. And so it's all about the people. It really is.
What do you think the industry is going to look like in the next few years?
I'm concerned. I'm concerned because, as much as anything, it's the double whammy of, for every month of the lockdown, there's 1 billion barrels of storage going into storage. And so even if you take apart any supply fundamentals that would normally exist, you have financial banks buying oil at $20 a barrel, and they will make profit on it at any normal state of the world. And so if you look back in January, when China's demand was down 3 million barrels a day. So China consumes 13 million barrels a day in their economy. And during the corona lockdown in January, it was estimated they were down 3. And oil was down $12 a barrel just on 3 million barrels a day. And so if we're pumping 1 billion barrels of storage a month and the lockdown lasts 2 or 3 months, to trickle back 3 million barrels a day will take 3 years for 3 months. And that $12 a barrel comes off the marginal barrel, which is really Russia barrel. So now 42 less 12 means for 36 months, you don't see really higher than a $30 or $35 world without Middle Eastern war, which would just be bad. And then add the element of demand destruction, where we used to be 100 million barrels a day, and now maybe we're 95 because people aren't flying and people aren't driving. And so I'm really concerned about just oil, in that we have so much people supporting the capital activity of our industry, fracks and drilling and operations engineers and geologists and landmen, and now you don't need any of them. So I really worry about the shrinkage. And I mean, the number I've said is 80%. I think 80% of staff from this point on in 6 months aren't working in energy. And so I really have a passion around trying to figure out how to pivot. And so I think your comment on the petroleum pivoters, I think is really important. I think how you transition into another industry and identify, what are you good at? Are you self-aware enough to do it? How do you emulate and model that person? And then the last piece I'd say is small business. Is so many people have this talent and this network of people, some who have money, some who have time, some who could advise. How can you build a business for the post-COVID world, taking all your skills and be successful as a small business entrepreneur? Because you have to be, because our industry is gritty and talented and wonderful. And so, that's what I see and what I'm really passionate about. But yeah, I mean, it's not a very bullish story for employment, unfortunately.
Yeah. And, and I'm concerned, even if everything was opened back up again this very moment, I think we're not going to see any real changes until, human psyche, I think, is going to be the what changes the energy industry. When people are finally comfortable, I may be allowed to go get on a plane right now, but am I really comfortable doing it? No, right. I'm not. Other people might be, but I think the majority of people are not. And so until that happens, we're not going to see the demand really go up, which is scary, because that's just prolongs the downturn for our industry.
Well, and your point exactly is it's just that couple percent, and we were talking about it today because Warren Buffett on the weekend, I'm sure you saw, sold all his position in airlines and said, look, I'm wrong. And because, could demand be down 25%, 20%, and if you have less seats on a plane, ticket prices have to double, which means now the demand to fly goes down. people might drive. There's so much that goes into each business that's so unique, and our energy industry obviously got hit by the double whammy of demand, and then the Russians and Saudis decided that this was the time to really kick back. Now if I want to be bullish, and I really am trying to be more optimistic of late, but if I want to be bullish, I really think natural gas is, not today and not to buy and start a company, but those who are in natural gas are going to have a longer run. And so after the last 10 years where natural gas players have just got beaten, now I think is going to be their heyday. And I do think that natural gas will be a winner in this. And so for those who are in that profession or pivot to that, I think it's going to be successful. So that's that. And like you, I am a huge fan of Vicki Holleben. I'm very lucky. The Women's Energy Network of Colorado is having me moderate a conversation between Tisha Schuler, who I had on the podcast 2 weeks ago, and is sort of an environmental activist turned energy advocate, and Vicki Holleben, obviously of Occidental, and talking about the future of energy and what it looks like in a post-COVID world. So I'm very, very lucky that I get to do things like that. And both of those women I'm very big fans of, as I am and always have been, as you know, of you. And I've always appreciated your insight and your knowledge and your level-headedness and your advice. And so, I think all the listeners would appreciate, reach out to Preng & Associates, and Laura in particular. There may not be a role, but she's, very giving of time and just a wonderful, wonderful person. I really can't say enough nice things about her. Tune in for the Women's Energy Network of Colorado event on Friday, live event registration. You can find it on LinkedIn. I don't recommend, for those you listeners, I don't recommend starting a hot take of the day unless you have a very unique skill set and career path, because it does have both positives and negatives. And Laura, thank you so much for joining. I really, really enjoy having the conversation with you.
Thanks, David. It was fun.
Until next time, everyone can follow us on the web, www.hottakeoftheday.com. Email me at drw@hottakeoftheday.com. And until next time, be safe, be good, have a great week, and bye for now.